Welcome back to the Gender Playbook. I am Leanne, a quick recap from episode 1 where we talked about participation gaps, Title IX, and I spoke with Sophia, an athlete in Hong Kong, about what it actually feels like to play in male-dominated sports like ball hockey. Today, I want to ask a different question. Not just why is there inequality, but is gender inequality in sports actually one of the biggest missed business opportunities? The entire US sports market is worth tens of billions of dollars. Women's sports, still just a tiny slice of that pie. But here's the plot twist that nobody is talking about enough. Over the past few years, women's sports revenue has been growing several times faster than men's. So if it's growing faster, why is the gap still so massive? Let me break it down with 3 reasons. First of all, merchandising. This one hits home for me personally. A while back, after my research on the first episode, I was in disbelief that the merchandising cap has such a big difference. Therefore, I walked into a regular sports store looking for a WNBA jersey. Not some obscure team, just any WNBA jersey. I couldn't find one. Not on a mannequin, not on the racks, nothing. For every 9 pieces of men's sports merch you see, there's roughly 1 for women's. And don't get me started on hats. The NBA has dozens of times more hats option than the WNBA. Dozens. That's not because of fans don't want it. That's a straight up supply problem. Research shows that the majority of women's sports fans want to buy merch, but literally can't find it. Nearly 8 in 10 says they'd buy more if it was actually available. And here's where my own survey backs this up. I asked my listeners and community, is women's sport merchandise harder to find than men's? The answer wasn't close. 84% said yes, it's harder. That's not a tiny majority. That's nearly everyone. Think about that. 8 out of 10 people in my survey are telling me that they spend money if brands would just make the products. Imagine leaving that kind of cash on the table. Second of all, broadcasting rights. Before I get into the big national numbers, I want to share something from my survey that surprised me. I asked people if they have watched women's sports recently. 78% said yes. That's actually high, which is great news. But then I asked a follow-up question. Do you watch more men's or women's? And the majority still said men's. So why? If people are watching women's sports, why aren't they watching more? Here's the answer. When I asked, what's stopping them? The top response at 56% was simple. I don't know where to watch it. Not it's boring or the athletes aren't as good. They literally don't know when or where to tune in. And the platforms tell us the same story. Most people said they watch women's sports through replays on TV or random Google search. Men's sports live on specific streaming platforms in real time. Evidence from national sports events also proves this point. A couple years ago, the WNBA landed a new TV deal worth hundreds of millions a year, triple their old one. Sounds amazing, right? Then you look at the NBA deal, which is in the tens of billions over the same period. The gap is still enormous. But here's the part that breaks my brain. Women's sports viewership exploded by over 400% in just 3 years, more eyeballs than ever, yet the media revenue earned per hour of viewing actually dropped. Let that sink in. In tech, fashion, or streaming, if you suddenly got 400% more users, would companies pull back? No, they pour gasoline on the fire. So why do we treat women's sports like a charity project instead of the rocket ship it clearly is? My survey confirms that demand is here. The problem isn't interest, it's access and information. Lastly, let's delve into sponsorships. The NBA pulls in a couple $billion a year in sponsorships. The WNBA, on the other hand, gets a couple $100 million. Still a big gap. But here's what's actually wild. The vast majority of professional women athletes earn very little, if anything, from endorsements. More than half earn nothing at all. A lot of them have to work second jobs just to make ends meet. Remember Sophia told us something powerful in the last episode? When she played on mixed teams, the stands were packed. When she played in women's league, mostly family and a handful of die-hard enthusiasts. That's not because women's hockey is boring, it's because the advertising, media coverage, and investments haven't caught up to the reality on the ground. But here's the hopeful part. Again, my survey surprised me here. I asked, would you buy a product just because a brand sponsored a women's sports team or athlete? Nearly 3/4 of respondents, 74%, said yes, they would. Let me repeat that. Almost 75% of the people in my survey are actively saying, support women's sports and I'll support you. That's not a niche audience, right? That's a mainstream consumer base waiting for the brands to catch on. Researchers in the UK found that millions of adults are more likely to buy from brands that sponsor women's sports. The fans are here. The growth is here. The purchasing power is here. And my own survey agrees. People want to watch, they want to buy merch, and they want to support the brands that show up. We can see that what's missing isn't talent or interest. What's missing is belief. Belief from broadcasters, belief from sponsors, belief from merch executives who still think women's sports is a niche instead of a massive, fast-growing market. So back to my big question. Is gender inequality in sports just old cultural bias, or is it one of the biggest missed business opportunities of our time? I think it's both, but the data is screaming that the audience is ready. The only real question left is who's brave enough to invest first? In the next episode, I'm sitting down with a real sports fan to dig into why we watch what we watch, viewership numbers, ticket sales, and what actually drives consumer behavior. You're not going to want to miss it. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Bye.